Hi, I'm Lisa Schultz, and I had the privilege of being on the board of directors for Grace Medical Home for 10 years and served as board chair, and still connected and passionate about Grace, but I have rolled off of the board. And it was a trustee that talked to me initially about joining the board, and of course I jumped at the opportunity because I had been in a prayer group with the founder's wife, and I had been praying for Dr. Hardy and what God was calling him to do, and so it was just an absolute privilege and joy to be on their board.
Hi, everybody. My name is Breanna Lathrop. So I am the Chief Operating Officer of Good Samaritan Health Center in Atlanta, but I'm here today because I'm on our board for CCHF. And so that's the hat I'll be wearing today. I'm in my second year. I'm secretary of our board right now, and it is truly an honor to work with the incredible folks that make up the board of directors here at CCHF.
I'm Fidel Menavanza. I'm originally from Congo, Kinshasa. I came to the US back in 2011 with no English at all. So I learned English from scratch. And I get the opportunity to serve on Jericho Road board. Jericho Road is based in Buffalo, New York. Back in 2014, how I ended up there, I had a good friend of mine who was celebrating his graduation from law school. During that event, the chair board was there. I was introduced to her, and directly she picked me. She said, you should join the board. I should say that I have a law background, so since then I served on the board back in 2014 until 2020, when the pandemic hit. I was again approached to switch from the board to serve on the management. So right now I'm doing compliance in the management. And I should say that serving on the board was my first ever experience, Jericho Road board, to serve. And so it was a great experience too.
And I jumped right into this without giving our student volunteers space for their announcements. And so I'm going to hand it to you. Praying for us to get started.
Yeah, so just going to pray both for our travel and for the session today then. So if you'll bow your heads with me. Dear God, thank you for loving us. Thank you for the call that you've placed on each of these attendees' lives to serve you and to serve their communities. I know for me as a medical student, I just feel like you've really brought up the theme of servant leadership for me over the last few months. And God, I just thank you for the ways that all of the people here have been servant leaders to their organizations. I ask that the words from our panelists today just flow and meet their hearts, all of these attendees, and that it changes their ministry and it changes the places that they work. I thank you for their willingness to serve on the boards that they are on. And God, I just pray a blessing over all of the ministries and all of the people that they serve. I also ask that you give us safe travels on our way home, wherever that be, and that the things that we learn here and the things that you spoke to us so clearly can really make a difference in the way that we love each other and the way that we love and share your gospel. And I also pray that maybe things that haven't come up for us might spark conversation later on, that I know that you reveal yourself to us in many different ways. So I just thank you for that. I thank you for who you are, and I thank you for the chance to be here to learn today. In Jesus' name, amen.
And I guess one other element that I should mention, in case you all haven't figured it out, is I am not Steve Noblet, who was originally slated to be on the session. They were just able to change that. Was that news to you? Okay, great. Well, it would be an honor to be thought of as Steve, but Steve is our leader of this whole movement, a leader, and works with Breanna and the board. And so when Steve and I talked, we have been talking for a couple of years about a curriculum for board members. And so I agreed to do this and a couple other sessions, then had some personal life and health challenges, so I wasn't going to come, but Steve still wanted this session to happen. And then I was able to call him about 10 days ago, and he notified them that now I could come, and some things were a little different. So this came together very quickly. And so Steve is very excited that those that are in governance roles, those that are former governance leaders of our clinic boards, and those that aspire to be board members, whether they're of our clinics or not, are here and interested in this. And there's, I'm not sure if the CCHF board ever discusses this, but there is some thought of putting together a board member manual, and we've talked about maybe a track of sessions for board members. So I'm just curious, and we're going to do a little bit of metrics of who you are, and then I'm also going to give you QR code if you're able to, or I have good old-fashioned business cards, because I will want to follow up with a lot of you and answer questions, and these sessions usually generate that. I'm finding it harder in the app, as we're all having to connect in the app, that I can't quite remember where I place people, because I usually keep a list of who's in every session. So if you want to connect with me, there's a QR code, and we'll send out the slides of this, because I've got some basic information on governance and boards. But the true value and the gift we're going to get today is your wisdom as 3 board members and what we can all learn from you. So let's just do a little bit of who's in the room. So how many of you are currently a board member of a clinic? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay. How many of you are a chief executive? 1, 2. Okay, so just almost as many. So you'll all have a valuable perspective of how to work with your boards and how to maximize your boards. How many of you are in a different leadership role but still on staff at a clinic? And okay, so we're going to have about 25% in each group. And then tell me, if you didn't raise your hand to one of those 3 questions, what role do you play? So someone who didn't raise their hand. Someone over here?
I'm a former board member.
Former board member. Okay. And of which clinic?
Christian Health Center in Las Vegas. I was the founding
Okay.
board chair.
Okay, great. And you have a grant writer that is there now who has inspired me all days but today to walk from our hotel about half a block away, because it was just too cold and I did not have a coat. But she's gotten me to walk every day. She told me Ubers were useless, that I should walk. So lovely grant writer. Okay, anywhere else not at one of those questions that you want to share where you're at?
Well, I do work for a CCHF clinic, but I'm here because I'm on the board of a national organization and a local organization, and we've never really had board training, so I want to make sure I'm doing what I need to do.
Okay, so here because you're on another national board in addition to leading your board. Okay, so let's do a quick this. How many of you are FQHCs by structure and design? Because you have a slightly different set of rules as defined by HRSA. Okay, so just a handful. Okay, how many are free and charitable clinics? Okay, so a good majority. And then what other constructive organizations do we have if you don't fit those 2?
We have a faith-based hybrid clinic.
A hybrid clinic, okay. Other representations, okay. So we're mostly the free and charitable clinics, some FQs, which have different structures. Are there any FQ lookalikes? Okay, so a lookalike is waiting to apply for, waiting for the window to open. And we have actually worked with some organizations that start out as, kind of call themselves a lookalike. They want to become an FQ, but as they get into it, the board actually has more fun with the fundraising part, which is uncommon, but happens, and with some other things, and then they decide not to shift, and they just stay a lookalike forever. Okay, great. Thank you for coming late which I'm not calling you out for being late, sorry about that. But we just decided that the attendance started out much smaller, so we decided to gather this way, and then it's kept growing. So thank you for joining us. It's mostly going to be a panel discussion. These are our panelists over here. So in terms of what we're going to talk about, a couple basics of board governance. I'm just going to show a couple slides of just kind of some rules and things like that. Then I started out possible areas to discuss. These are often the things I get asked as a consultant when we're talking about governance and board structure. These are the 2 most common questions. How do we find new ones? And how do we engage the board in fundraising? So I'm sure each of you will have different perspectives on that. And then we're really going to open it up for any other questions. So that's really the focus of today. So if you have questions, and it doesn't have to be related here, it could be really anything around boards, we want to hear from our expert panelists. And then I know there are other experts in the room because I've worked with you, so I hope that we can engage in this kind of discussion. So general overview of the board's role. The first one, primary duties. You've got the duties of care, loyalty, and obedience. These are the legally defined IRS duties. And again, I see taking pictures and notes. We'll send these out afterwards, so just make sure to connect with me if you want to just kind of read it there. And then being present. And for those, we had a little session this morning, and Steve Noblet joined us for some coffee this morning, and I didn't even really remember. This is another slide. But when we said to Steve, what's the most important thing about your board? He said being present. So making sure you're engaged, making sure you know what the mission is, what happens in your clinic or your organization. I'm often amazed when I meet new client partners or prospective client partners, and we go around and like the staff know some board members and the board members know the staff. So just being there, being a part of it, just because you're a board member doesn't mean you're on the outside. You are on the inside of the organization and have to be present. There's some fiduciary obligations that are best practice. Obviously making sure there's no conflict of interest, so the IRS word for that is inurement, if any of you in the legal world know that. And making sure you're protecting the organizational assets. So that there are a couple things that you are the guardians of. You are the guardians of mission, you're the guardians of the organizational assets in all aspects, whether they're financial, human capital, infrastructure, other things like that. Ultimately, we always kind of say worst case, right? If there's a lawsuit, if there's a headline or something, a lot of times the board is called to be accountable for these aspects of the organization. In leadership, your main role is hiring. You have one employee if you're a board member, and that is your chief executive. And then we generally advise as best practice, stay out of their business because everyone else are their employees unless they ask for your support. So they may need your support from an HR perspective. They may need your support from how do I work with this kind of employee? Or right now, never before have we had 5 active generations in the workforce. And a lot of CEOs who have been around for a while are really struggling with the first and the second level generations. How do I relate to people who are 28? And are coming here not to start a career, but to get an experience. That's a very common thing that we're hearing. And some CEOs who have been in leadership for 30 or 40 years just are really struggling to relate to that. So you are a resource to them, and you only get involved in staff matters if they ask. Your responsibilities are hire, evaluate, fire if needed, reposition the organization's chief executive. So they are, quote, your employee. Ambassadorship is what I love to talk about, is kind of the piece of board personship that a lot of people don't always think about. You are a representative of the brand, whether it's in communications, in marketing, in fundraising, in inviting, in praying. You are the ambassador of the organization, and that's a big piece of what leaders need you to do, what the team needs you to do. And lastly, garnering resources. Usually that means fundraising, so we don't want to shy away from that and push that under the rug. When I started doing this work, we had a lot of board members who would say, oh, they never told me I had to raise money. So anyone, does that apply to any board members in here? You were told okay, yes, I see a shaking head there. Anyone else? I am glad to say that in most of my current work today, we don't hear that anymore, but that was 27 years ago, so times have changed a lot. But a lot of times board members would say, hey, they never told me I had to raise money. I don't want to raise money. That's not why I'm on this board. But garnering resources is important. It's resources of knowledge, in-kind resources, obviously financial donations, and other types of resources. One of the great areas that a board I serve on, the garnering of resources really came to light in pandemic. Is not myself, but we had other healthcare professionals on the board that were actually able to get our organization, which served those without housing and early childhood, and then we actually opened a center for 24-hour care for healthcare workers' children, so healthcare in the beginning of the pandemic. So the garnering of resources, our board could get all the PPE that a general human service agency couldn't get at the time. Our board, we had some amazing people that were able to garner those resources so we could do our work to provide backdrop and service for those that were first responders and in the healthcare field. So resources often are thought of as money, but the resources come in many ways. So for those of you that are FQs, let me go there quickly. There are some separate requirements that HRSA defines. Often we talk about it as Chapter 20. And so just quickly looking there, there's a certain size. So you cannot get a 50-person board, or you have to do different auxiliary structures and other things like that. 51% of the board members need to be of patients served. Many of the groups we've worked with define that very differently. We had one group we worked with that of patients served during the pandemic was everybody that was vaccinated. And I said, well, that may work short term. I don't think that's going to work long term. But different ways in which to do that. So for those of you that are FQHCs, this is probably not news to you in any way. There's different levels of compliance, and when they come to your site visit, these are things that they look at with a board. So there's some basics there. Then the last slide, and then we're going to go to the panel, that I do like to share because it applies to several of you at different levels. Hello, Maggie. Thank you for joining us. You actually can be a panelist too, I think, in many ways. This might be a little small, but it talks about different kinds of boards in the life stages of board. So I think one of you that we talked with might be definitely in the founding stage, even though you're well past founding, because there's a lot of things that happen in your founding stage. So the stages are founding, managing, leading, governing. Those are the kinds of stages that you're in. And on the left side, there's different characteristics of an organization at different stages. So what are the board members like? What's the board composition? What's the focus? So founders, and this is always a fun one, we call it an FOF board, the Founders and Friends of Family Board. Oftentimes in a founding stage, you have a lot of close board members that are maybe not helping you set up all best practices, but they're surrounding you for support. There's a planning focus, a fundraising focus, the board's role, and what kind of staff generally there are in philanthropy. So I don't know how easy is this to read for those in the back of the room? Okay, and we, again, mail it out or take a picture of it. We can kind of go through that. But this is a good thing for a board to look at. And for those of you bringing in board members and board recruitment, I would encourage you to kind of self-identify where your organization is at and clearly articulate to potential new board members what kind of organizational stage are we at right now. Yep.
So is this a timeline description or is this the
general? Yep. I mean, we have some boards that never get out of founding. So I'm working with an organization right now. They've been in the founding stage for 37 years. And so it's somewhat difficult to help them attract a next leader. So the question was for the recording, sorry, is this a timeline in the chart that we're sharing? I have to repeat it for this. Is this a timeline in the chart we're sharing, or what is it? And so this organization I'm working with right now, I would say they've been in founding stage for 37 years. And the founder's not quite ready yet to go, but the board she now has, I would say the board is moving into the managing stage, so they're starting to see they need to transition if they're going to be sustainable. And so it doesn't matter which stage you're in, and there isn't a better or best stage. It's where your organization is at. The healthiest boards, the optimally functioning, I think a couple of the clinics in here are generally the governing stage, and we'll say that's the healthiest because they're most sustainable, they can endure the most, and they are least fragile in terms of their longevity. But it doesn't, we have some boards that are managing boards that say they want to be governing boards, but nothing they do exhibits how they're going to transition to be a leading board or a governing board, so there's different phases that an organization can be in. Okay, so I'm going to start with our panelists, and in whatever way, I'm going to let the three of you start with, and I'm going to prompt the first question. I guess I keep forgetting this isn't helping us with the speaker there. So what do you do to attract new board members? That's a pretty big question. So CCHF, let's start from a CCHF perspective. How does CCHF attract new board members?
So CCHF has two main ways that we bring in new board members through nomination. One is that Steve himself is very active in kind of having conversations, identifying people within the organization, and will submit nominations to the board. And then the board members themselves are encouraged from the board terms are 5 years for CCHF. And during that time, part of our role too is to build relationships and identify people that we work with, people we connect with at the conference, people we know within our circles, to say who else should we be mentoring and bringing on board so that CCHF has a continual, sustainable leadership structure. Then there's a formal process by which there's a filled out nomination form. So we might be discussing people and names, but no one is contacted or officially in that process till that nomination form is completed. And it becomes the role of the governance committee of the board to follow up with that person, get a full application completed, conduct an interview, and then present that candidate to the entire board.
Do you want each of us to answer?
Who fills out the nomination form?
Whoever is doing the nominating. So that could be if I'm going to nominate someone, I'm responsible for filling that out. Steve has the ability to fill one out.
Can people self-nominate?
Yeah, I'm not sure that has been done. And Maggie, feel free to jump in. Maggie is on our board as well. I am not aware of that happening recently, but I'm not sure it's. And a lot of times what will happen is if colleagues are working together, there'll be a conversation. They might say, yeah, that actually interests me. And they'll say, great, I'm going to put your name in. So usually it's done more. People may self-identify, but they're going to do that within the confines of a relationship of someone that would nominate them.
Do you want each one of us to answer the question? Okay.
We'll start that with all three of you, then we'll go open to
Okay.
questions.
All right, and I'll say Stephanie should jump in if I need to be corrected, our CEO of Grace Medical Home, because I have rolled off the board. So my understanding of the board nomination process, though, was that the board members would be asked to make recommendations on who we thought would be good representatives or good ambassadors for Grace, and sometimes we would talk about diversity. We would talk about diversity in a lot of different ways, including subject matter expertise as well, and what the board mix might need. And so the board would discuss and generate ideas, and then ultimately make it through the governance committee, but ultimately it would go to the trustees, and the trustees then would reach out and go through the process with potential candidates. And one of the things that Stephanie and I were just talking about that I think makes Grace very special is that the Board of Trustees will talk to people to gauge an interest and tell them that they want to talk to them about Grace and moving forward. But if those individuals that they speak with don't feel called to it, aren't actively engaged, excited, and feel like the Lord is leading them to engage as a board member, then they don't follow through with that nomination. So I would say it's a very much a spirit-led process.
And how is the audio for those not here? Do we need to turn on the speaker? Or are you all hearing okay? It depends on who's speaking. Okay. Okay, so it depends on who's speaking. So try to project and speak loud.
Okay, I will try. Yeah, I will echo what my colleague did say. I believe I did also share from my own experience how I got to serve on the board. It was a random thing. I never expected. I met with the board chair in event. Then she picked me up. So I also have to say that Jericho Road serves mostly refugee and immigrant population. I believe on the back end, I did share the same experience. I believe during the conversation we had with my colleague, I was about to share the challenges we are facing, not we, but the board is facing, how to integrate a refugee or immigrant board member who's knowledgeable and who has some literacy. Because it's not guaranteed. We have some of them, but it's not always guaranteed. I do know, let's say the president of the board was about to resign, but she doesn't want to leave without having a replacement people who can keep the work going. It's a combination of patience. I'm personally patient of Jericho Road, and that's how I end up to the board, besides the fact that the chair board did recruit me. And when I did resign from the board, I did also my best to find a replacement from my community, because I'm kind of the representative of immigrant and refugee population. From my network, I knew who would be the best fit to get to the board. So I did nominate him, and he went through the same process of being assessed by the board chair before he ended up to join the board. So from a Jericho Road standpoint, it's not guaranteed that we have all the board we need because it's a long process, but people who are patient, but also who want to serve, who are knowledgeable and be present, who want to be present. And I don't know what it is your experience, but from Jericho Road, it's a voluntary-based board, so it's sometimes hard to get people who want to volunteer to serve on the board. That's among the challenges I did experience personally. I believe they are still there. Yep.
And as Fidel shared, I'm hoping you all, and if you don't, go home by the end of the day, Tuesday, and write board roles and responsibilities. And one of the things that should be in there is when your term is up or when it's ready for you to go replace yourself. That's something we forget to ask often board members. It's like, oh, no, please don't go. Let me try to get you to stay. But then if that's just not possible for whatever is going on in their lives, then the next question is, who can serve as you have served, in the same way or different ways? Who can you bring to us? And that is something that oftentimes a high-functioning board that maybe has, term limits these days are considered best practice. 6 years or 9 years probably at most is where you need to fall, is our recommendation. But then at that point, when that board member steps off, who are they helping bring in to fill the shoes that they left? So what do we want to ask our panelists? We have a CCHF board member, we have a highly engaged past board chair and just recently off the board, and we have a board member turned staff member. So what do you want to ask them? What did you come to this session hoping to learn? And then I'll repeat the question for the recording, and we'll let them answer it. I know there's tons of questions because I've been asked questions the entire weekend. Okay, and tell it, where are you from?
I'm Fidel. I'm from Lawndale Christian Health Center, but I'm also a founding board member for the Fidel School of Chicago, which is a multicultural Christian classical school that's in a underserved community on the west side.
Okay, so a board member of Lawndale Christian, and a staff member of Lawndale, and a founding member.
We're transitioning from a founding board to governing board.
Okay.
And so my question is, we're planning a retreat, and we are looking for someone who could come in and facilitate best practices and help us shape our vision for what we want our governing board to look like and function like. So my question is, how might we go about finding someone who can do that, and what would be at least two things that we definitely would want this person to have or skills?
Okay, so board retreats. So I'm going to expand your question a little. Do you do board retreats, and say a little bit about them, and what do you focus on as a topic?
Daisy knows my answers, right? As a past board member. So at CCHF, we have 3 board meetings a year, 2 of which are in person and extend over the course of 2 days. So there is time built in for sharing of meals, praying together, worship together. So although it's not called a retreat, it often does have some of those elements that we think of. I will share 2 from my other hat as a staff member at Good Samaritan Health Center that we actually just did our first board retreat in a long time at our clinic because we are starting a new 5-year strategic plan. We actually found that someone that had been volunteering in our clinic in order to get, she was transitioning careers and needed to get hours towards PA school, but had an entire 15-year history in public health and was trained as a facilitator. And so what we did is we said, she's not in that capacity currently, but she knows who we are as a volunteer. She's been with our staff and our patients, and a few of us staff members sat down with her and said, we'd really love to bring the board someone that can share a piece of who we are as you facilitate this strategic planning session. And it really was a great experience to have someone in that facilitation role. That at the end, we have done other facilitations where we have hired, where we have gone out, and they were less effective. And I think what she was able to bring was to say, let's start with the heart of who we are as an organization, what we do, and then how do we put that as the framework as we talk about our strategic visioning. Now I know that was something that we were just, a God gift that we had someone in that role, but it did make me just think about facilitation in a different way, that I think sometimes I have been quick to say who has the right training or who calls himself a facilitator, and not always saying who understands us and our mission, and with some good conversations could easily be a good facilitator.
Do you want to go next?
Yes. During my tenure, I believe I did attend twice time the retreat. The most recent one was with, I believe, a consultant from CCHF. Maggie, correct me, or Kayla. And but beside that, we had the opportunity to have Steve Noblet back in 2016 or 17. He came to Buffalo. During that retreat, we spent, I believe, 3 or 4 days, and we did learn a lot from that retreat session. So I believe if I will recommend someone, I will pick Steve Noblet. I know there are other, but we did honestly love being with him.
So I'm just hearing whispering. How many people here has Steve Noblet facilitated one of your board retreats? Okay.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Okay.
I would just echo some of the things that have already been said. I do believe just asking other peers, where you could find a skilled facilitator. Steve, obviously, I think Heather would probably do a great job at that as well. With I think the skill set that you want to look for, though, is if you're hiring someone that you don't really know as a facilitator, is one, just great communication skills, but also I would really have a conversation with them about how they handle conflict in those types of conversations, because that's not always an easy thing to do. And so someone that's a skilled communicator is going to be able to help you break that down and to pass through some of those hard conversations that boards tend to get into in those conversations. We had a number of retreats with, when I was on the board for Grace, I facilitated some of them. and that's always fun. So there may be somebody on your board that might be interested in doing that and able to navigate that effectively.
What other questions can these panelists answer for you? Or did you come here to learn today?
I guess my question would be if, I don't know how to word this question. If, I believe that our board is ripe for some training, some structure, some just refocusing. Are there tools, assessments, anything that you could recommend? Because I think it's going to have to start with the recognition of how far off we could possibly be from best practices. Sure. And then the motivation of that team then to do the work of progressing. So, any suggestions?
So what are board resources? What are some training tools? So I'm going to just share a little nugget of knowledge here. So there's a group out there called Board Source. And it's, like a 1-800 look for good board info. It's a great online tool. They also have assessments. There's also an assessment, and I know I have a copy of it, and it's from some Connecticut nonprofit or whatever, and it's like a self-assessment tool. So send me a note on that, and I will find that for you. And it's a great tool. You can do self-assessments. You can hire a consultant for assessments. You can have the board and the staff do a collective assessment. That's something fascinating that I've facilitated and seen that work very well. So the staff giving feedback to the board, we always want to be a little careful because they are volunteers. And a term I use a lot, which is the care and feeding of volunteers. You want to manage them well, but they also need to know how are they doing, right? So are they serving the needs of the organization? Your executive director needs to be your conduit for that. So executive directors, I know a couple of people have done some board training. So can we ask for recommendations from you, and then we'll let the panelists wrap it up. So Jocelyn, I know you've done it. So tell me how you helped your board go through some education. Okay.
Well, we're actually, I like that earlier slide you had. I think that really,
Oh, yeah, excellent. Sorry, thank you, Doug.
I think that really talked about it because Covenant's been around a little over 20 years, and we're in governance, but then there are some elements where I think we're like leading. So it was just interesting for me to look at it, and so that's where our training is. Honestly, is trying to get our board, structure to match where our organization actually is now, and so. We've really been doing a longer strategic planning process, and in that process, because we are a FQHC, I wanted my patient board members to feel very comfortable participating. So I'm going to work my question in my comment for you guys. But sometimes we are talking all this healthcare stuff in jargon, and they're in meetings with physicians and all, and I've got patients who are just quiet. And so we started talking about what trainings did they need. So we're doing finance trainings, kind of like Health Center 101 for our board members before we jump into the strategic plan, because I'm not going to get good feedback from my patients if they're in these long meetings feeling like I don't even know where to jump in. And so that's like we're almost taking 12 months before we go to our strategic plan just to train and just to take some time and get them used to talking in meetings of this size, because they don't always do that. And they've been on Zoom for 3 years. And so we're just kind of re-engaging each other. And so it's been really back to basics for us. And we actually did do an external consultant. Heather's done some work with us, as well as there was another lady who was Michigan-based. And that was because we have all been serving at Covenant for a long time, and even in different positions. And we needed some external voices to kind of jog us up a little bit. And so that was really, really helpful for us. So if I could work my question, is that okay? You don't have to, you don't have to answer it right now, but they can, I was wondering, has there ever been a time that an organization has made it easier for you to participate as a board member, or more engaging for you to participate? So that's my question.
So is there another CEO that's given their board some resources that wants to comment on that, as Jocelyn did, or any other staff member that you've worked with board members to give them some education? You want to share anything?
Stephanie has. So.
I was hoping Stephanie would speak up, so.
I will say what you do, but you can say that.
Do you want to do?
Yeah, sure. So I'll just say, the best resources that I've, Avante, shared with my board is other board members. And it starts with our founding board. And so really, I do a board book, and I give them what they need, and I do an orientation, and I literally give a notebook. It's probably dating myself, but I find it, they may want to grab it, and I can share with you what I put in there if you want it. But certainly the fiduciary stuff, the stuff they need to have, bylaws, policies, they need to know that, financials, things like that. And then I do a monthly dashboard that I feel like the board needs to have oversight of, stuff and stuff like that. But truly for me, the best for continuity purposes is where I've really seen, board members who are terming off, work with newer board members and really bring them along and train them. Lisa did a great job when we had a bylaws change about, 6-7 years ago, and actually put in the job description that our board members were actually torchbearers of our culture and the importance of that. So we spent a lot of time in culture and what that means and how the board can support it. So I think using other board members to help with that is really huge.
So I'm going to do a CCHF plug here, if that's okay. I started off sharing, I know Steve wants to develop this board book and develop board resources. Would people be willing, if we put out a call in the collective we, I don't know who's, send us these 5 policies for a board so we can start to pull that together to help all of you to see that? Is that something, I don't sense CCHF to be a super competitive group. I don't think I'm wrong in that, but is that something just by nod of head? So Steve, if you're listening to this recording later on, I'm making the plug you want, to begin to pull some board resources together. Is that something we can help? Okay, who else wants to share anything about board resources, the 3 of you or anyone else? Lisa.
Something that Stephanie talked or didn't say that she does, and that is a board assessment where she is a number of questions that she's asking us about our role and our effectiveness, and they're very specific questions, and then the board answers them, and they're compiled without your knowledge of who said what. And then she brings those results back to the board, and it's sort of a gap analysis of what we need to improve on in board management and board practices. And if there's a particular issue or challenge that came out of that, then we'll spend time focusing on what that is, so that there's always a spirit of an expectation and a continual improvement.
And if that's sometimes the board assessments, so the board source and that Connecticut one I can make available, those can be very overwhelming. So at a basic, I would take these left-hand column sides here of board members, composition, general focus, planning focus, fundraising, board philanthropy, staff for philanthropy. Even just start with those. They're simple, easy ones. I think that's actually how we developed this chart to help guide at a board retreat. Like, how do we even know what we need to do? Okay.
I'm Dan, in Virginia, and I've been chairman of our board for now almost 3 years. Our organization is about 20 years old. In fact, it's our 20th year, so already that's yes. There are days when I really feel overwhelmed with the scope of what I need to do. And I hear about the structure of boards, best practices, and I'm like, I'm a kindergarten here, and I need to be in high school. And for an organization that's our size, we have 5 providers, maybe 15 employees. I know there's other groups, other ministries like ours. I need a mentor. I need somebody, another board member, a leader, who I can share my experiences with. Because I get the big picture, but what I really need is, how do I engage my board? How do I punch with them and help them see the vision and the passion? And I'm a visionary. I got lots of ideas, but when it comes down to is my relationship with my board. And I feel like that's the biggest hurdle that I'm facing right now. So, does CCHF, are there resources for mentors? Folks like that?
So we're going to go to Jocelyn's question first, and then to yours. They are out there, but my simple answer is they're kind of hard to find. So I bet you there's some in here that might be willing to engage in some conversation. There are, much like staff leadership can get coaches, there are board coaches as well. But Jocelyn, your question around engaging patients in planning and how do you do that? No, didn't.
Patients, in general, as board members, what's the best way you can serve by an organization? Like, if it's something that an organization has done that is major board meetings, something you look forward to, you make the materials, something that's easily digestible, accessible for you guys.
That's lovely. So so it's a little bit of engagement too in Dan's question. How has your organization served you? So let's see. You haven't started yet, right?
Okay,
Yeah.
I'll start.
You started the last.
Okay.
So then we'll go to Fidel and you Lathrop.
So Grace was a very fun board to be on, and it's very spirit-led as an organization, and it's just every board meeting, they start with a mission moment. And so they share about a recent story that's happened in their clinic. And so it was always super I mean, you know the stories, but they're also super heartwarming and inspiring, and just kind of sets that tone for like why we're here. And I think that always, and just the fellowship, and then the commonality, and the just the passion around why we are all here, what we're doing, just set the tone for the rest of the meeting. And then Stephanie mentioned a dashboard, but the dashboard is really cool, and it's high level data that is what's happened since the last time we've gotten together, and all the different metrics and categories, and that's interesting. It's colorful, so that's exciting. And but they also always have a patient quote, a recent patient quote, and it's just again reminding us of why we're engaged in the business administration of the board, the governance of the board, but why we're all doing it. And I think that was very fun. I'm on another board that I love going to the board meetings because it's just always inspiring. And there are in that one, other representatives of the community. And again, I think it's because we start that one with a devotional, and we just always are remembering and reminding ourselves of why we are all there, and that makes a difference.
We have the same similarities with Jericho Road Board. The president, who's a retired college teacher, always start with a prayer. I think I say that it's a mix of community member. We have a judge, a retired executive, huge corporate organization, and refugee and immigrant population. But personally, to me, it was at the time I was serving. It was always a great time to be among all those board members, because you learn from them, but they were kind of two ways of learning. They would listen to us coming from foreign country, sharing our experience, sharing our cultural competency, but also personally, I did say that that was my first experience on serving on the board. I've learned a lot, and that's still helping me even now as I have joined the management team. So it's depend, but from what I've learned from my experience at work serving on Jericho Road Board, it was engaging. So they will share the material a week before the meeting, and the board chair will ensure that all of us have the same material before even we start. We know what we will talk about, and they give us the opportunity to share whatever concern you may have or any information you think the board should know. And we will pray together. Sometimes we will just be quiet and silent because it was sometimes heavy thing or information, so we need to be silent and listen to what God can say. It's a great experience. Definitely, I did have. It's not perfect though, but it was a great experience and engaging. And I made always sure that to be there, although I was busy with going to school, but I made sure to be. I would say. For a year, I would say I never miss one month of meetings. Yeah.
One strategy at CCHF that's helped me feel like I could become a successful board member was actually the orientation process, which starts with interviewing. So when you are being considered for the board, you're actually interviewed by 2 current board members. And what I liked about that interview process was there was a conversation about who I am, what I could bring to the board. But there was also from them some discussion about what was their experience on the board, what was it like, how much time did they spend, what were their specific roles and duties. And there was a real open conversation about like my level to commit. Did I have the time? Was this a good moment in my life? And now being on the board, those answers then get discussed by governance in terms of, okay, so-and-so is really looking for leadership. and growth and personal development. So-and-so believes in the vision of CCHF and wants to support, but this is going to be a rough year. This person really can't take on a whole lot of tasks for another, maybe on year 2 or 3 of their term. And that's important as we make decisions about who to bring on and when to bring on. Then the second part that happened was once I came on the board, I actually had probably an hour and a half sit down with Steve where he talked about what did he need from me. And what was so helpful to me is it wasn't just what did he need from his board, but what did he hope that I could bring in terms of my skill set or coming from, like, for example, a free and charitable care world. And what were the things about CCHF that he was looking for voice and input in? And it really helped me frame, okay, this is what I need to be ready to do, and this is why I've been asked. CCHF has also been really open in those conversations about, like, what committees need the most help right now, and why, and do I have that skill set? Because if I don't, I need to be like, hey, I love what you guys do, but if you need only finance people right now, you should put off my nomination a year, right? And I really appreciated, by the time I got to that first meeting, I felt very informed about what I was doing on that board. And then there's a formal orientation at your first board meeting where you come an hour before and actually sit with governance and you walk through those policies and how to find them on the Dropbox and who's in charge of what and how long have people been here. And so I just felt that I was walking into that first meeting very new, but that I wasn't brand new, that I knew who was who around that table, and I knew why we were here, and I knew what I needed to do. And so I think that that's something then I've taken back to my organization to think about. Am I being that specific with our new board members? No. And that was an area that I could improve learning from CCHF. And then the last thing I'll say that was really helpful for engagement, and this might go a little more towards that second question versus the first, but from a Good Sam perspective on our board, one thing we did is that before we started our strategic planning retreat with the board, we actually just threw a breakfast where we had the board come in with our staff, and we opened a little late that day, and we strategically sat board members with tables with staff they didn't know. And we had like icebreakers that were just fun, and then we had story sharing, and the energy our board brought into that board retreat was like nothing I'd seen before, because they had the faces of our frontline workers in their mind, and they felt like, this is exciting. So-and-so made me laugh so hard I couldn't even eat my breakfast, that there was this like sense of community and friendship. And I think that, for me as a board member, that's part of what I love about coming to a board meeting, is these people are friends. I'm going to get prayed for. I'm going to connect with like-minded people. And we can do the same in our organizations. We have to think about, like, if people aren't engaging, maybe it's because they don't feel that sense of belonging, and that board members are also looking for that in their roles as well. That yes, they want to serve, and yes, they're a part of that mission, and they're sold in on that, but perhaps they're feeling a little isolated, either about why am I here, what's my role, or perhaps they're feeling like, I don't even know if I know what's going on in the clinic. Should I have a governance role if I'm not involved? And so thinking about how sometimes those little things that just took a half an hour, it was just the first 2 patients of the day. We planned far enough in advance that the schedule was closed, that it just reminded me of, as a clinic leader, being really intentional about making sure our board feels emotionally connected, not just knowledgeable.
My question is both from the CEO perspective, but also a board member on these other organizations. I am like frugal by nature, and so I don't like to spend money, and but that can be dangerous, like, right? Because then I take it all on myself, and I need to be the expert in all these things, and then I'm part of these other boards where, like, they hire consultants for everything and spend a lot of money. So I guess my question is, like, what do you think is appropriate? I mean, what do you expect the leader to do? I mean, because you can spend a lot of money on consultants, and I wrestle with that, but then I see, like, well, one of my boards is United Way, and they have a lot of money. And I'm like, wow, okay, so how do you balance that, I guess?
Yeah, my first experience with working with a consultant, I do believe we did hire him. We pay him at the time, but we figured out it was not worth paying him. And the work he did, although was nice, but I do think it didn't help. And we end up to not hiring a consultant, but relying on internal resources or network like CCHF. So it depends on each case. Jericho Road is a FQHC. We don't have enough money, so we will already use the resources we have to either serve more patients or trying to help other things than just recruiting or paying for a consultant to come to join us for a strategic plan or a retreat. Yeah. So it will depend. I mean, I can speak to what I know from a Jericho Road standpoint. I don't know how you from your organization could share your experience. Yeah.
Since I was on her board.
Fair enough. Yeah, I think probably there's something about coming out of the free and charitable care world that if you weren't frugal already, you're going to end up that way, right? So I tend to be that person as well. So I mean, I think there's a couple of things I think about, and one is that the board is responsible for the financial sustainability of organizations in terms of oversight, and so I think it's okay to question when expenses don't seem in line with the goals. And then I think because I tend to be a little more on the don't spend money side of things, the other thing that I've challenged myself with is saying my number one responsibility is that the board hires the CEO, and I need to trust my CEO, and that the first thing I need to do is ask, am I getting the right data to understand the financial decision? Because sometimes financial decisions that look scary to me at first glance, when I see the breakdown of like, where was the thought process behind this? Where are we predicting that money comes from? I can be like, no, that money's there. And I remind myself that my goal is not to say how the money gets spent unless it's working against the mission, unless it seems misaligned. My goal is to say, do the numbers look like we can be open in another year or two? And so it's been just a helpful exercise for me, because I do find one of the challenges is if your day job is management and then you're on a board, it's a different part of your brain. And I do need to continue to remind myself that, like, I'm not in a management role here, I'm in a director role, and so what are the skills and what's being needed of me here, and turn that other piece off, which is still a learning process for me, but I think that's been one way that's helpful. I do think it's harder, I know obviously, maybe United Way's had boards a long time, they're established, but I work with another organization that I'm currently finance chair, and they don't have the structure in place that I feel like the staff doesn't need extra oversight. So I think that's too, as you kind of approach any new board or role, saying, is this an organization with a lot of history of financial stability that there is more room for trust? Or is this a place where maybe I do need to mesh a little more into much more managerial, because whether it's a founding board or just a very smaller board, sometimes the skill set isn't there on staff yet, and that's okay. They're not grown to that point yet.
It is entirely appropriate, and I would strongly encourage, and I'm going to read my list of resources so you can let me know what else I need to send. Put a budget line item for board development. Let the governance committee or the executive committee decide how to spend it. In other groups, I'll say a minimum of 5,000. In this group, I'll say a minimum of 500. Put some money in there, because you're right. Sometimes you draw on the internal resources, which are great, and they often know you better, but you might be missing an opportunity just to get an outside perspective, and sometimes that outsider. So in your budgeting, put in board development or board governance, or give the governance committee a budget sum and make them spend it. So we'll hopefully put something in for professional development of our staff and our team, and perhaps your professional development is coming here to the conference. Give your board that ability to spend some money and pay a speaker an honorarium, or pay a speaker to do your board assessment. So we do have to wrap up.